The desert sun beat down mercilessly on Forward Operating Base Phoenix as Sergeant Maria Rodriguez adjusted her rifle scope for the third time that morning. The heat waves dancing off the sand made everything shimmer like a mirage, but Maria had learned to see through the distortion. She had been stationed in Afghanistan for 8 months now, and the harsh landscape had become as familiar to her as her hometown streets in Texas. Maria wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her gloved hand, leaving a streak of dust across her tan skin. At 26 years old, she was one of the few female snipers in her unit, a position she had fought hard to earn and even harder to keep. The other soldiers respected her skill, but she could still feel their eyes on her sometimes, waiting for her to make a mistake that would prove she didn't belong. Her spotter, Corporal Jake Matthews, lay beside her on the rocky outcropping that served as their observation post. They had been watching the valley below for signs of enemy movement since before dawn. Intelligence reports suggested that Taliban fighters were planning to attack a convoy that would be passing through later that afternoon. Maria and Jake's job was to provide overwatch and eliminate any threats they spotted. Movement at 2 o'clock, Jake whispered, his binoculars trained on a cluster of mud brick buildings about 800 meters away. Looks like 3 individuals, possibly armed. Maria shifted her rifle and peered through her scope. She could make out the figures moving between the buildings, but the heat distortion made it difficult to determine if they were civilians or combatants. The rules of engagement were clear. Positive identification of hostile intent was required before taking any action. "I can't get a clear visual," Maria reported through her radio. "Need eyes on target for positive ID." Captain Williams' voice crackled through her earpiece. "Copy that, Overwatch. Maintain position and continue surveillance." Maria had joined the Army 5 years earlier, straight out of high school in a small town outside of San Antonio. Her father had been a Marine, and her older brother was already serving overseas when she made the decision to enlist. Growing up in a military family meant she understood the weight of the uniform and the responsibility that came with it. Sniper school had been the most challenging thing she had ever done. The physical demands were brutal, but the mental pressure was even worse. Every shot had to be perfect, every decision calculated. There was no room for error when lives were on the line. She remembered the first time she had to take a life, a Taliban fighter who was about to detonate an IED near a school full of children. The shot had been clean, saving innocent lives, but the weight of that moment still stayed with her. "Rodriguez, you still with me?" Jake's voice brought her back to the present. "Yeah, I'm here," she replied, refocusing on the target area through her scope. The figures had disappeared into one of the buildings, but Maria kept her rifle trained on the area. Experience had taught her that patience was a sniper's most important weapon. Sometimes they would wait for hours without seeing any action, but when the moment came, there would be only seconds to react. Her radio crackled again. "Overwatch, this is command. Convoy ETA is 30 minutes. Be advised, we've received intelligence that enemy forces may be equipped with advanced weaponry. Stay alert." Maria felt her heart rate increase slightly. Advanced weaponry could mean anything from RPGs to sniper rifles of their own. She had faced enemy snipers before, and it was always a deadly game of chess played at long range. The first one to spot their opponent usually won. The heat was becoming unbearable, and Maria could feel sweat pooling in her tactical vest. She took a small sip from her water tube, careful not to take too much. They might be in position for several more hours, and dehydration was as dangerous as enemy fire in this environment. Jake suddenly tensed beside her. "I've got movement again. Same location, but this time I can see weapons." Maria peered through her scope and confirmed the sighting. 3 men with AK-47s were positioning themselves behind a low wall that provided a perfect view of the road where the convoy would pass. Their intent was clear. "Command, this is Overwatch. We have 3 confirmed hostiles with small arms, positioned to engage the convoy. Request permission to engage." "Overwatch, you are cleared to engage. Take them down." Maria took a deep breath and settled into her shooting position. The range was well within her capabilities, but the heat shimmer and wind conditions would make the shots challenging. She calculated the distance, wind speed, and bullet drop in her head, adjustments she had made thousands of times in training and combat. The first target was partially concealed behind the wall, presenting only his head and shoulders. Maria placed her crosshairs just above his left ear, accounting for the slight breeze coming from the west. Her finger found the trigger, and she began the slow, steady squeeze that would send the bullet downrange. Just as she was about to fire, a sharp crack echoed across the valley, and a cloud of dust erupted from the rock inches from her head. Someone was shooting back, and they were good. Maria rolled away from her position as another bullet struck where she had been lying just moments before. "Sniper," Jake yelled, scanning the valley through his binoculars. "I can't see the muzzle." Flash! Maria's heart pounded as she tried to locate the enemy sniper. This was what she had trained for, but it never got easier. Somewhere in that maze of buildings and rocky terrain, another professional killer was hunting her, just as she was hunting them. The convoy was getting closer, and those 3 fighters were still in position to attack it. She needed to eliminate the immediate threat to the convoy while staying alive long enough to deal with the sniper. It was a deadly puzzle with no margin for error, and the lives of everyone in that convoy depended on her ability to solve it quickly. The sun continued to beat down mercilessly as Maria prepared for the most challenging engagement of her military career. Maria pressed herself against the rocky outcropping, her mind racing as she tried to locate the enemy sniper who had nearly taken her head off. The convoy was still 20 minutes out, and those 3 fighters by the wall were getting into better positions. Every second that passed put more lives at risk. "Jake, can you see anything from your angle?" she whispered into her radio, not daring to expose herself again. "Negative. Whoever it is, they're well concealed, but I think the shot came from that cluster of buildings about 600 meters northeast of the original targets." Maria closed her eyes and visualized the terrain. She had studied every inch of this valley during their mission briefing. The buildings Jake mentioned were old, partially destroyed structures that would provide excellent concealment for a skilled marksman. If she were in the enemy's position, that's exactly where she would set up. Another shot rang out, this time aimed at Jake's position. He dove for cover as the bullet ricocheted off the rocks above his head. "They're trying to pin us down," he said through gritted teeth. "We need to do something fast." Maria's training kicked in. She had faced this exact scenario during advanced sniper school. Multiple targets with one being another sniper. The instructors had drilled it into them. Neutralize the immediate threat first, then deal with the counter-sniper. But real combat was messier than any training exercise. She army crawled to a different position about 10 meters to her right, using the natural rock formations for cover. From this new angle, she could see the 3 fighters by the wall more clearly. They had set up what looked like an RPG launcher in addition to their rifles. If that convoy came down the road, it would be a massacre. Taking a deep breath, Maria settled into her new firing position. She would have to take all 3 shots quickly before the enemy sniper could reacquire her position. The first target was still partially hidden behind the wall, but she could see enough of his torso to make a clean shot. The crosshairs settled on the center of his chest. Maria controlled her breathing, let out half a breath, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and through her scope she saw the man drop. 1 down. She immediately shifted to the second target, who was now aware that they were under fire and trying to take cover. He was moving too quickly for a precision shot, so Maria led him slightly and fired. The bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around but not dropping him completely. The third fighter had grabbed the RPG launcher and was pointing it in her direction. Maria knew she had maybe 2 seconds before he fired. She didn't have time for a perfect shot. She aimed for center mass and pulled the trigger. The man crumpled behind the launcher, but her celebration was short-lived. The sharp crack of another rifle echoed across the valley, and she felt the bullet pass so close to her ear that she could hear the sonic boom. The enemy sniper had found her again. "I need to move," she told Jake. "Keep eyes on that building cluster and try to spot muzzle flash." Maria began a tactical withdrawal, using the rocky terrain to mask her movement. She needed to find a position where she could engage the enemy sniper without exposing herself to return fire. It was like a deadly game of hide-and-seek, played with high-powered rifles at long range. As she moved, her radio crackled with an update from command. "Overwatch, convoy is 15 minutes out. What's your status?" 3 targets down, but we have a counter-sniper situation." "Still working the problem," Maria replied, trying to keep the tension out of her voice. She found a new position behind a large boulder that gave her a view of the buildings where she suspected the enemy sniper was hiding. Through her scope, she began systematically scanning each window, each doorway, each potential firing position. Somewhere in that maze of concrete and shadows, her counterpart was doing the same thing. The heat was making everything shimmer like water, but Maria had learned to read the distortion patterns. A movement in one of the upper windows caught her attention, just a brief glimpse of something that didn't belong. She focused her scope on that area and waited. Patience was crucial in counter-sniper work. Whoever moved first usually lost, but the convoy was getting closer, and Maria could hear the distant rumble of engines starting to echo off the valley walls. If there were other enemy positions they hadn't spotted yet, the vehicles would be sitting ducks. Jake's voice came through her earpiece. "I think I see him. Second floor of the tallest building, window on the left side. Something's moving in there." Maria shifted her aim to the window Jake had identified. At first she saw nothing, then a brief glint of reflected sunlight, probably from a rifle scope or barrel. Her target was finally revealing himself. The distance was challenging, about 650 meters with a slight crosswind. Maria calculated the holdover and windage in her head, then settled her breathing. This shot had to count. If she missed, the enemy sniper would immediately return fire and possibly relocate to another position. Through her scope, she could just make out the outline of a human figure behind the window. It wasn't a clear shot, parts of the window. Frame blocked her view, but it was the best opportunity she was likely to get. Maria placed her crosshairs on the center of what she could see and began her trigger squeeze. Halfway through the pull, the figure in the window moved slightly, giving her a cleaner shot at his upper torso. The rifle fired, and Maria immediately began moving to a new position without even checking to see if she had hit her target. In counter-sniper warfare, you never stayed in the same spot after taking a shot. As she moved, she heard Jake's excited voice over the radio. "Hit, I saw him go down. No movement in that window." Maria allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction, but she couldn't celebrate yet. The convoy was only 10 minutes out, and there could be other threats they hadn't identified yet. She found another firing position with good visibility over the entire valley and began scanning for any additional enemy positions. The engagement had taken less than 5 minutes, but it felt like hours. Maria's heart was still pounding from the adrenaline, and her hands were slightly shaky as she reloaded her rifle. This was the reality of combat. Moments of intense action followed by tense waiting, never knowing when the next threat would appear. Maria wiped the sweat from her eyes as she maintained her overwatch position. The convoy was now 8 minutes out, and the valley had fallen eerily quiet after the firefight. But something felt wrong. In her months of deployment, she had learned to trust her instincts, and right now every nerve in her body was telling her the danger wasn't over. "Jake, you getting anything on thermal?" she asked, referring to the thermal imaging scope that could detect heat signatures even in the blazing desert sun. "Negative. Everything looks clear from my position." "Maybe we got them all." Maria wasn't convinced. The attack had been too easy, too obvious. 3 fighters in the open and 1 sniper in a predictable location. In her experience, Taliban fighters were smarter than that, especially when they were planning an ambush on a high-value convoy. Her radio crackled. "Overwatch, this is Convoy Actual. We have eyes on your position. Thanks for clearing our path. ETA 5 minutes. Through her binoculars, Maria could see the dust cloud on the horizon marking the convoy's approach. 4 heavily armored vehicles carrying supplies and personnel back to the main base. If the enemy had planned this ambush carefully, there would be more fighters positioned along the route. "Command, this is Overwatch," Maria transmitted. "Recommend convoy hold position. Something doesn't feel right about this setup." "Overwatch, command. Intelligence indicates the threat has been neutralized. Convoy is cleared to proceed." Maria gritted her teeth in frustration. Sometimes the people making decisions from air-conditioned command centers didn't understand what it was like on the ground. But orders were orders, and her job was to provide support as requested. As the convoy entered the valley, Maria kept her rifle scope moving constantly, searching for any sign of additional threats. The vehicles were moving at a steady pace, maintaining proper spacing and tactical formation. Everything looked normal, but that nagging feeling in her gut wouldn't go away. The lead vehicle was halfway through the valley when Maria caught a glimpse of movement on a ridgeline about 800 meters to the south. It was just a brief flash, barely visible even through her high-powered scope, but it was enough to get her attention. Jake, ridgeline south, about 800 meters. Check it out. Jake swung his binoculars toward the area Maria had indicated. I'm not seeing anything. Could have been an animal or just heat distortion. Maria continued to study the ridgeline through her scope. The terrain there was rocky and broken, providing excellent concealment for someone who knew how to use it. She was about to dismiss it as a false alarm when she saw it again. A brief movement that was definitely human. Contact south. I have movement on the ridge, she transmitted urgently. As if her words had triggered it, the ridgeline suddenly erupted with muzzle flashes. At least 6 fighters with automatic weapons opened fire on the convoy from an elevated position. The vehicles immediately began taking evasive action, but they were trapped in the narrow valley with limited options for cover. Maria didn't wait for orders. She immediately engaged the closest target she could see clearly. The range was at the edge of her effective engagement distance, but she had made harder shots before. Her first round caught one of the attackers in the chest, dropping him immediately. The convoy was returning fire with their mounted weapons, filling the valley with the sound of heavy machine guns and rifle fire, but they were at a serious disadvantage, shooting uphill at concealed targets while they themselves were exposed in the open terrain. Jake, I need target designation. There are too many of them for me to engage effectively. Roger that. Priority target. Center of the ridge behind the large boulder. He's got what looks like an RPG. Maria shifted her aim to the position Jake had identified. Through her scope, she could see a man crouched behind a rock formation, with the distinctive shape of a rocket-propelled grenade launcher on his shoulder. If he got a clean shot at one of the vehicles, it would be catastrophic. The range was nearly 900 meters, pushing the limits of her rifle's effective range in these conditions. Maria had to account for the elevation difference, wind conditions, and heat distortion. She took a deep breath, settled her crosshairs, and squeezed the trigger. The shot was perfect. The RPG gunner dropped backward, his weapon clattering down the rocky slope. But there were still at least 4 other fighters on the ridge, and they were adjusting their positions to get better angles on the convoy. Good shot, Jake called out. Next target, left side of the ridge. Machine gunner in the rocks. Maria was already shifting her aim when she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. The distinctive whistle of incoming mortar rounds. Somewhere out there, the enemy had positioned a mortar team, and they were now dropping rounds into the valley. The first mortar exploded about 50 meters behind the convoy, sending up a plume of dirt and shrapnel. The vehicles accelerated, trying to get out of the kill zone as quickly as possible, but the valley was narrow and they couldn't move too fast without risking a rollover on the uneven terrain. Command, this is Overwatch. Convoy is taking fire from multiple positions. We need immediate air support, Maria transmitted while continuing to engage targets on the ridge. Overwatch command. Air support is 15 minutes out. You need to keep that convoy moving. 15 minutes might as well have been 15 hours. At the rate the enemy was pouring fire into the valley, the convoy wouldn't last that long without help. Maria knew she and Jake were the convoy's best hope of survival. Another mortar round exploded, this one closer to the vehicles. Maria could see that one of the trucks had taken shrapnel damage and was smoking, but it was still moving. The discipline and training of the convoy crews was keeping them alive, but they needed the pressure taken off immediately. Jake, can you spot the mortar position? Negative. Could be anywhere in those hills. But I'm seeing more muzzle flashes on the opposite ridge now. This is a coordinated ambush. Maria's heart sank. They were facing a well-planned attack with enemies positioned on multiple sides of the valley. She and Jake were just 2 people against what appeared to be a reinforced squad, or more of Taliban fighters. The math was not in their favor. But Maria had not survived 8 months in Afghanistan by giving up when the odds were bad. She methodically began engaging targets in order of priority. Anyone with an RPG or heavy weapon first, then machine gunners, then riflemen. Each shot had to count because she was running low on ammunition and there was no way to resupply. The convoy was almost through the worst part of the valley when disaster struck. A mortar round landed directly beside the second vehicle, lifting it off the ground and flipping it onto its side. Maria could see figures moving inside the overturned truck, but she didn't know how badly anyone was injured. The convoy ground to a halt. They couldn't abandon their people, but stopping in the kill zone was a death sentence. Maria knew she had to do something dramatic to change the tactical situation, even if it meant exposing herself to enemy fire. Maria watched in horror as the overturned vehicle began taking direct fire from multiple positions. The convoy medics were trying to reach the injured soldiers, but enemy rounds were kicking up dust all around them, forcing them to take cover behind their own vehicles. "Jake, I'm moving to a forward position. I need to get closer to those ridges to be more effective." "Maria, that's suicide. You'll be completely exposed out there." But Maria was already moving. She had identified a rocky outcropping about 200 meters forward that would give her better angles on the enemy positions. The move would put her well ahead of any friendly forces and directly in the enemy's line of sight. But it was the only way she could provide effective support for the rescue operation. She sprinted across the open ground, keeping low and using whatever minimal cover she could find. Bullets snapped through the air around her, some so close she could feel the pressure waves. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds, she dove behind the rocky position she had chosen. From this new location, Maria had a much clearer view of the enemy positions. She could see at least 8 fighters spread across the southern ridge, and more on the northern side of the valley. But more importantly, she could now see the soldiers trapped in the overturned vehicle. 3 men were moving inside, apparently alive but unable to get out, because the doors were jammed against the rocky ground. Maria immediately began engaging the fighters who had the best angles on the rescue operation. Her first shot dropped a machine gunner who was raking the convoy with automatic fire. The second eliminated a rifleman who was specifically targeting the medics trying to reach the overturned truck. But her new position, while tactically superior, had made her the primary target for enemy fire. Bullets were striking the rocks around her constantly, sending chips of stone flying through the air. Several times she had to duck completely behind cover as concentrated fire forced her to break off her shooting. "Overwatch, this is Convoy Actual," came a strained voice over the radio. "We have 3 wounded in the overturned vehicle. We need to get them out now, but we can't approach under this much fire." "Roger that, Convoy." "Working the problem," Maria replied, immediately shifting her aim to engage a fighter who was positioning himself for a better shot at the rescue team. The range to most targets was now between 300 and 500 meters, much more manageable than her previous position. Maria began working systematically from one side of the ridge to the other, taking carefully aimed shots at every enemy position she could identify. Her accuracy was deadly at this range, and she could see the effect it was having on enemy morale. Several fighters abandoned their positions and retreated further up the ridge, but the mortar fire was getting closer and more accurate. The enemy observers had clearly identified her position and were adjusting their indirect fire to eliminate her. Maria knew she had maybe minutes before a mortar round landed directly on her position. "Air support 2 minutes out," came the welcome news from command. But Maria wasn't sure the convoy had 2 minutes. The enemy fire was intensifying, and she could see that one of the trapped soldiers was no longer moving. Jake's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Maria, I've got a better angle on that mortar position now. I think it's in the draw about 400 meters northwest of your position." Maria shifted her scope to the area Jake had identified. It took her several seconds of searching, but she finally spotted them. 2 men with a small mortar tube positioned in a natural depression in the ground. They were well camouflaged, but their movement as they prepared another round gave them away. The shot was technically possible, but it would require perfect execution. The range was about 550 meters and the targets were partially concealed. Maria would have to thread the bullet between rocks and vegetation to hit either man. She settled into her shooting position and controlled her breathing. This shot could save the entire convoy, but if she missed, the mortar team would likely relocate and continue their deadly work from another position. Maria placed her crosshairs on the man loading the mortar round. He was bent over the weapon, presenting a small target, but it was the best she was going to get. She began her trigger squeeze, maintaining perfect sight alignment despite the bullets still impacting around her position. The rifle fired, and through her scope Maria saw the mortarman pitch forward. His partner immediately grabbed for the weapon, but Maria was already working the bolt action to chamber another round. Her second shot caught him as he was trying to rotate the mortar tube toward a new target. With the mortar threat eliminated, the immediate pressure on the convoy was reduced significantly. The rescue team was finally able to reach the overturned vehicle and begin extracting the wounded soldiers. But Maria's exposed position was becoming untenable. Enemy fire was coming from multiple directions now, and several fighters had moved to positions where they could engage her from her flanks. She needed to relocate again, but leaving cover would mean crossing open ground under direct observation. The sound of approaching aircraft gave her hope. 2 Apache attack helicopters were coming in fast and low, their distinctive rotor noise echoing off the valley walls. But they would need target designation to be most effective, and Maria was the only one with eyes on most of the enemy positions. Blackhawk 7-1, this is Overwatch. I can provide target designation for enemy positions. Roger, Overwatch. We have you in sight. Send targets. Maria began calling out coordinates for the enemy positions she could see. The Apaches immediately engaged with their 30mm cannons, walking devastating fire across the ridgelines. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Enemy fire slackened significantly as fighters either died or fled their positions. With air support now providing covering fire, the convoy was able to complete the rescue operation. All 3 soldiers were extracted from the overturned vehicle and loaded into the other trucks. One was seriously wounded and needed immediate medical attention, but he was alive. Convoy, this is Overwatch. You are clear to move. Air support will escort you out of the valley. Roger that, Overwatch. We owe you one. Outstanding work today. Maria allowed herself a moment of relief as she watched the convoy vehicles begin moving toward the valley exit under escort from the attack helicopters. But her own situation was still precarious. She was alone, nearly out of ammunition and still receiving sporadic fire from enemy fighters who had survived the air attack. Jake's voice came through her radio. Maria, you need to get back here. There are still hostiles in the area, and we need to extract before they regroup. Maria began her withdrawal, moving carefully from cover to cover as she worked her way back toward Jake's position. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the firefight was beginning to wear off, and she could feel the exhaustion creeping in. Her hands were shaking slightly and her mouth was dry despite drinking regularly from her water tube. As she moved, Maria reflected on what had just happened. The ambush had been well planned and expertly executed. If she and Jake hadn't been in position to provide overwatch, the entire convoy could have been destroyed. The thought of what might have happened to those soldiers made her push harder to reach safety. The extraction helicopter touched down in a whirlwind of dust and rotor wash as Maria and Jake ran across the landing zone. The pilot kept the engines spooled up, ready for immediate departure. Within seconds, they were airborne and heading back to forward operating base Phoenix. Maria slumped against the metal wall of the helicopter, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of exhaustion. Her rifle felt impossibly heavy in her hands, and she could see that her uniform was soaked through with sweat and dust. Jake sat across from her, equally drained but wearing a satisfied smile. "Hell of a day's work, Rodriguez," he said over the noise of the rotors. "Command is already talking about putting you in for a commendation." Maria nodded but didn't respond. She was thinking about the wounded soldier they had pulled from the overturned vehicle. During the brief moment when the medics were loading him into another truck, she had seen his face. He couldn't have been more than 19 years old, probably on his first deployment. The sight of his pale, blood-streaked face reminded her why she did this job. 20 minutes later, they were back at the base. As soon as the helicopter landed, Maria was summoned to the command center for a debrief. Major Harrison, the battalion intelligence officer, wanted a complete account of the engagement while the details were still fresh in her mind. "Sergeant Rodriguez, walk me through everything you observed today," the major said, spreading a detailed map of the valley across the table. Maria spent the next hour recounting every detail she could remember. The number and positions of enemy fighters, their weapons and tactics, the coordination between different groups. Intelligence was always hungry for this kind of information because it helped them understand how the enemy was organizing and planning their operations. "In your assessment, Sergeant, was this a coordinated ambush specifically targeting the convoy, or did they just happen to be in position when it came through?" Major Harrison asked. "Definitely coordinated, sir. They had multiple firing positions prepared, indirect fire support, and they knew the convoy route. This was planned well in advance." The major made notes on his tablet. "That suggests they have intelligence sources giving them our movement schedules. We'll need to review our operational security procedures." After the debrief, Maria finally made it back to her quarters. The small prefabricated building she shared with 3 other female soldiers Felt like a luxury hotel after spending the day in the desert heat. She stripped off her gear and uniform, then stood under the lukewarm water of the camp shower for a long time, washing away the dust and sweat of combat. That evening, Maria sat in the dining facility picking at her meal and thinking about the day's events. Word of the successful defense of the convoy had spread through the base quickly, and several soldiers had stopped by her table to congratulate her. But she found it difficult to feel celebratory about taking lives, even enemy lives. Corporal Jennifer Walsh, a military police officer Maria had befriended, sat down across from her. "You look like someone who needs to talk," she said. "Just processing everything, you know?" "It was a close one today," Jennifer nodded. She had been deployed for almost as long as Maria and understood the mental toll that combat operations took. "You saved a lot of lives today. That convoy would have been torn apart without your overwatch." "I know. It's just, some of those fighters couldn't have been much older than my little brother back home. Makes you wonder what they might have done with their lives if they hadn't chosen this path." "That's what makes you human," Jennifer replied. "But remember, they made their choice when they decided to attack coalition forces. You were just protecting our people." Later that night, Maria lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come easily. It never did after a major engagement. Her mind kept replaying the firefight, analyzing every decision she had made. Could she have engaged the enemy sooner? Was there a way to neutralize the threats without moving to that exposed forward position? These questions would cycle through her thoughts for hours. She thought about her family back in Texas. Her parents had no idea what their daughter had done today, and she couldn't tell them even if she wanted to. The details of combat operations were classified, and even if they weren't, how could she explain the reality of taking human life to people who had never faced that situation? Maria's phone buzzed with a text message from her brother Carlos, who was stationed in Iraq. "Heard through the grapevine you had some excitement today. Stay safe, Hermana." She smiled despite her exhaustion. The military community was surprisingly small, and good news traveled fast through informal channels. She typed back, "Just another day at the office. Miss you." The next morning brought a surprise summons to the battalion commander's office. Colonel Rebecca Stone was a veteran of multiple deployments and had a reputation for being tough but fair. When Maria reported to her office, she found the convoy commander and several other officers already present. "Sergeant Rodriguez, I wanted to personally thank you for your actions yesterday," Colonel Stone began. "Your quick thinking and aggressive action saved American lives. The convoy commander has provided a detailed account of how your overwatch fire enabled the successful rescue of wounded personnel." Captain Rodriguez, the convoy commander, stepped forward. "Sergeant, I know my men would be dead right now if you hadn't taken that forward position and engaged those enemy fighters. We all owe you a debt of gratitude," Colonel Stone continued. "I'm putting you in for the Bronze Star Medal with Valor device. Your actions exemplified the highest standards of courage and professionalism under fire." Maria felt a mixture of pride and discomfort. Military awards were important recognition of service, but she had always felt that doing your job well was its own reward. "Thank you, ma'am. I was just doing what I was trained to do." "Nonsense. What you did went far beyond the call of duty. Moving to that exposed position under fire was an exceptional act of courage." After the meeting, Maria walked back to her quarters thinking about the strange nature of military service. In civilian life, she had been just another college student working part-time jobs to pay tuition. Here, split-second decisions she made with a rifle could mean the difference between life and death for people she had never met. Her deployment was scheduled to end in 2 months, and Maria had been trying to decide whether to re-enlist for another tour or return to civilian life. Days like yesterday reminded her why she valued military service, the knowledge that her skills and training could protect others. But they also reminded her of the heavy price that came with that responsibility. As she cleaned her rifle for the 3rd time since returning from the mission, Maria realized that the young woman who had enlisted 5 years ago was gone forever. Combat had changed her in ways she was still discovering. Whether those changes would help or hinder her transition back to civilian life remained to be seen. 3 weeks later, Maria received news that would change everything. During a routine medical evaluation, the base doctor discovered that she had developed a serious inner ear condition that was affecting her balance and coordination. The condition, likely caused by repeated exposure to loud gunfire and explosions, could potentially end her military career. I'm sorry, Sergeant, but I have to recommend you for a medical evaluation board, Dr. Captain Mills said as he reviewed her test results. Your balance issues could compromise your effectiveness as a sniper, and more importantly, they could put you and your teammates in danger. Maria felt like the ground had dropped out from under her. Being a sniper wasn't just her job, it was her identity. She had worked harder than anyone to earn her position, and now a medical condition beyond her control threatened to take it all away. How long before the evaluation board makes their decision? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Could be anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 months. In the meantime, you're restricted from sniper duties and long-range patrol operations. The next few days were the most difficult of Maria's military career. She watched from the sidelines as other snipers took missions that should have been hers. Jake tried to be supportive, but she could see the concern in his eyes. Without her as his primary sniper, he would be paired with someone else and their hard-earned partnership would be broken. Colonel Stone called Maria into her office a week after the medical evaluation. Sergeant, I know this is difficult for you, but I want you to know that regardless of what the medical board decides, your service record speaks for itself. You've made a significant contribution to this unit. Thank you, ma'am, but being a sniper is all I know. If they won't let me do that anymore, I'm not sure what my future in the Army looks like. There are other opportunities, Sergeant. Your leadership skills and combat experience would be valuable in training positions, or you could consider transitioning to intelligence work. But Maria couldn't imagine herself behind a desk or in a classroom. The thought of teaching others to do what she could no longer do herself seemed like torture. 2 weeks later, the medical evaluation board delivered their verdict. Maria's inner ear condition was permanent and progressive. She would be medically retired from active duty with full benefits, but her career as a sniper was over. The news hit her harder than she had expected. That night, she sat alone in her quarters, staring at her rifle and trying to process what this meant for her future. At 26 years old, she was facing the end of the only adult career she had ever known. Jake knocked on her door around midnight. Mind if I come in? Maria gestured to the empty chair beside her bunk. Just trying to figure out what comes next. You know, there are a lot of opportunities for someone with your experience in the civilian world. Private security, law enforcement, even military contracting. Maybe. But it won't be the same. I won't be protecting soldiers like we did in that valley. Jake was quiet for a moment. You know that wounded soldier you helped save? The young kid from the overturned vehicle? Maria nodded. He sent a letter to the unit. Wanted to thank the sniper who kept the enemy off them during the rescue. He's recovering well, going to make a full recovery. He's got a wife and a baby daughter back home. Maria felt tears forming in her eyes for the first time since receiving the medical board's decision. That helps, actually, knowing he's okay. You've made a difference, Maria. Maybe your time as a sniper is ending, but that doesn't erase what you've accomplished. You saved lives. You protected people who couldn't protect themselves. That's something to be proud of. The final month of Maria's deployment passed quickly. She spent her time helping with base security operations and mentoring junior soldiers who were interested in sniper training. Although she couldn't take them on actual missions, she could share the knowledge and experience she had gained over 5 years of service. On her last day at Forward Operating Base Phoenix, Maria stood on the same observation post where she had first spotted the enemy ambush 3 weeks earlier. The valley looked peaceful in the morning light, giving no hint of the violence that had occurred there. Jake joined her for the farewell. You're going to be missed around here. The new guy they're bringing in has good scores from sniper school, but he's got big shoes to fill. Take care of him, and take care of yourself. I don't want to hear about any unnecessary heroics while I'm gone, says the woman who charged across open ground under fire to save a convoy. They stood in comfortable silence, looking out over the landscape that had been their workplace for so many months. Despite everything that had happened, Maria realized she would miss this place. Not the danger or the violence, but the sense of purpose and the bonds she had formed with her fellow soldiers. The helicopter ride back to the main base for her flight home gave Maria time to reflect on her military career. She thought about all the missions, the lives saved, the friends made and lost. The inner ear condition might be ending her time as a sniper, but it couldn't take away the experiences that had shaped her into the person she had become. As the aircraft lifted off for the long journey back to the United States, Maria looked down at the Afghan landscape growing smaller below her. Somewhere down there, Convoys were still moving along dangerous roads protected by soldiers like the person she used to be. The knowledge that others would continue the mission gave her a sense of peace about leaving. 3 months later, Maria was living in a small apartment near her hometown in Texas, trying to adjust to civilian life. The transition was harder than she had expected. Simple things like grocery shopping or driving in traffic felt overwhelming after the structured environment of military life. But she had found purpose again, working with a veterans organization that helped recently returned soldiers transition to civilian careers. Her combat experience and leadership skills made her effective at connecting with veterans who were struggling with their own adjustments. One afternoon, she received an unexpected phone call. It was the young soldier from the overturned vehicle, the one whose life she had helped save during the convoy ambush. "Ma'am, I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your contact information from Corporal Matthews. I just wanted to thank you personally for what you did that day." Maria felt a familiar tightness in her throat. "You don't need to thank me, soldier. I was just doing my job." "Maybe, but you went above and beyond. I'm back home with my family now, and every day I get to spend with my wife and daughter is because of what you and your spotter did. I wanted you to know that your service mattered." After ending the call, Maria sat quietly in her apartment, thinking about the unexpected ways that life can change. Her career as a sniper was over, but the impact of her service would continue long after she had hung up her rifle. In the end, that legacy was worth more than any medal or commendation. The young woman who had enlisted 5 years earlier to serve her country had become someone entirely different, stronger, more confident, and deeply aware of both the costs and rewards of protecting others. Although her time in uniform was finished, the lessons learned in places like that valley in Afghanistan would guide her for the rest of her life.